Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. I am really excited about today's project because it is another collaboration with Jess from Oklahoma Roots. You may remember the Parkside Tote that we collaborated on. If you don't, I'll have that linked in the description below the video and you can check that out. But we combined our skills or our audiences and we came up with a quilted bag. Well, this time we are doing a block party. Jess has designed 12 beautiful scrappy blocks, and it's going to make an entire quilt, and we're doing one block per month. My part in this, I am a quilter this much. I know how to do it, but I have no business teaching you how to do it, and I don't have the time to invest in a full-size quilt. So what I'm going to be doing with the block party is coming up with alternative ways to use those blocks in quick little projects. You know I love a quick, fast, easy project. So I'm going to be coming up with alternative ways to use those blocks for those of you who want to learn to quilt or enjoy the process, but like me, don't have the time to make a full-size quilt. So for the very first block, ta-da, I made it out of cardstock and I even sewed on it. So let me get this one up here so you can see. Can you see it? I actually put this on the sewing machine and sewed the quilt block. And here's another one. This was my first test run. So really fun alternative way to use a quilt block pattern. Now, Jess has a PDF and an SVG on her website. If you have a digital die cutting machine, you can load that SVG up, and I'm going to walk you through how I used it to create this card. If you don't have a digital die cutting machine, you can still use the PDF and just print it out at a smaller size. I'll get into that as we go through the video. Now I'm using the Cricut Joy and some adhesive back cardstock, but you can use any cardstock you want. This one was made with the Cricut Joy adhesive back cardstock. This one was made with just some cardstock from my stash. So we're going to learn how to sew on paper. We're going to learn how to use a quilt block using cardstock, and we're going to create some alternative fun cards. I think these are going to be so much fun to send to a person who sews or a quilter, or even just for an everyday note card. I don't know if you can see it. I did embellish this one. It says hi, and I just added some little stickers. This one, again, I just added some stickers and buttons just to make it a little bit more card-like. But again, it's a basic quilt block. So without further ado, let's get started. If you're hand cutting the pieces out, you can fast forward through the next part of the video. I'm going to walk those who are through Cricut Design Space and how to get the SVG into Cricut Design Space. So here we are in Cricut Design Space. The first thing we need to do is go to oklaRoots.com and download the SVG that Jess has provided for you. When you download the SVG file, it will download as a file that ends in .zip, a zip file. What you need to do is double click that zip file before you go any further. Now we're in Design Space. We're going to click Upload, Browse, Browse. We're going to navigate to where we saved that file. Now this is what I was talking about. This is how the file is going to download. It has SVG, but then it has .zip. You don't want that file. You want the file that's inside that will open once you double click on that zip file. And it's called month1 march.svg. You're looking for the file that ends in .svg. You may or may not get the thumbnail preview. Sometimes I don't. So you're just going to click on that and click open. Here you can name it whatever you want. I like to name it by the author, especially if I'm downloading something so I remember where it came from. I'm going to call it Quilt Block. I'm going to call it Block Party. Anything that you might look for when you're searching for this particular project in the future, go ahead and tag it down there. And you can also rename it up here if you want. And then we're going to click Save. Once you do that, you can see I have already done this, but it should be the very first one in your tray right here on the very left. You're just going to click on it so that you get that green outline and click Insert Images. Now, if you're just making the quilt block of the month, the fabric version, you're all set to go. All you have to do is click Make It, and you can go ahead and proceed with the quilt block from here. If you're doing the alternative project, which for this month is going to be a card, this is what you're going to need to do. First of all, click on the machine that you're using. I am using the Cricut Joy, but you could do this with the Explorer or the Maker or whatever digital die cutting machine you have. you're going to follow those directions. But we're using the Cricut Joy, so I'm going to show you how to create the size that we need for a card. So the first thing we need to do is, while it's selected, right click and click ungroup. That allows us to move every piece separately. So what I'm going to do is just move these blocks into place roughly. This does not have to be exact. I'm just trying to get everything closer together so that we can line everything up. Now you're going to notice when Jess makes an SVG, this is very awesome for lining up your fabrics, but we need to account for that. So she makes the corners, they're actually straight lines, but they're kind of rounded. So you need to line it up so that the tip of this is covered, so that it forms a straight line just like that. And like I said, this does not in any way have to be exact for this particular step of the project, but I'm just trying to get everything basically lined up the way it would go. And again, it's not going to be perfect. I'm not worried about it, but just basically lined up. So this would go here, this would go here, roughly lining things up. This would go right in here, right here, right here. Now obviously I've got that whole block too low, so that would go there. And again, you can see I'm just roughly lining things up. Just like that. All right, now that we have everything basically in a block form, again, it's not perfect, that's fine. I'm just going to click and drag to select all, or you can just click right up here and click select all. That means every layer that is showing is selected. Once we have that all selected, we want to make sure that this lock is in the lock position. You can check it right here or right up here in between your width and height measurements. You want to make sure that is in the lock position, and then we're just going to select the width and we're going to change it to 5.0. This is going to give us a card that is roughly 5 inches. It might be 4 inches, it might be 4.5 inches when we're done. It really just depends on how you line this up, because this is a pattern with built-in seam allowances for quilting, for fabric. So your card might be a little bit, you know, like I said, it's going to be somewhere between 4 and 5 inches when it's finished, just depending how you line things up. But for right now, we're going to set that width to 5 inches, and you wanted to make sure that everything was selected so that it's proportionately ready to go. So that's all we need to do at this point. We're going to click Make It. And again, I'm using the Joy, so the next step could look slightly different on your machine. If you're using the Cricut Joy, it's going to give you some options. Are you using Cricut Smart Materials, which means you don't need to use a mat? Are you using materials that you need to use a mat? Are you using the card mat, or are you going to be going back and forth between the two? I'm going to be using the adhesive back cardstock that's made for the Joy. So I'm going to be using a mat. If you're using regular cardstock from your stash, you're going to use a mat. So I'm just going to choose that and click Done. And now you can see Cricut has already, or Design Space has already set this up ready to go for Cricut Joy. So it's showing a small mat. I'm actually going to use the large mat. So I'm just going to change that for my project, but you can use whatever you want. I just happen to get the large one out. And also, at this point, in no matter what machine you're using in Cricut Design Space, you can move these things around. I get that question a lot. If you want to use a different part of your mat, or using a scrap piece of material, and you cutting half of it up here and half of it down here, you can absolutely move these things around. So don't feel like you have to go with where Cricut sets it up. For this particular project, I'm just going to leave it where it is. But perhaps on this mat, you can see you're kind of wasting some paper. So you could move this up here and save on paper if you want. Just a little tip there. And again, you can change the mat size right here. If you decide to switch and use the Smart Materials, you can change that right here. So that's what you need to do in Design Space. I'm going to go ahead and cut all of these materials out in the order that they're showing. So I'm just going to click Continue. It's looking for the Cricut Joy. It's connected. And here you can choose the materials that you're going to be using. If I was just using cardstock from my stash, I would choose this one that says medium cardstock, 80 pound. I would choose this one. However, I am using the deluxe paper that's adhesive backed, which is this option right here. So what that's going to do is when it cuts it out, it's going to cut it out more like a sticker. It's going to leave that backing in place, and it'll be more like a sticker. So you can remove the piece, leaving the sticker paper adhered. So go ahead and choose your proper material. You're going to load the Joy, and we're going to switch the camera over and go over to the Cricut Joy so that you can see how this works. If you're cutting this out by hand, obviously you can skip all of this part and proceed with the assembly of the card. Okay, so what you're going to need to start this project is the PDF or SVG. If you don't have a digital die cutting machine, you can still do this project. She's got the actual pattern pieces included in her PDF. The only exception is you're going to have to figure out what percentage to print it at, because you're not going to want to print it at full size or you're going to end up with this huge card front. So what I would suggest is try printing it maybe at 50% and see how big that makes your final project, but you can adjust it accordingly. But if you have a digital die cutting machine, she's provided an SVG and it works perfectly. I'm going to be using the Cricut Joy. I could also use any other of my Cricut machines or any other digital die cutting machine, but I'm going to use the Cricut Joy. This is going to be a probably about an A2 size card. It might be a little bit smaller. I think I'm going to shoot for a square card, so maybe 5x5, 4x4, something like that. And I'll show you how we're going to determine that sizing. So I've printed out the SVG or the PDF, and I'm going to reference this first part right here. This is what your SVG is going to look like, and this is what your coloring is going to look like on the screen. So I'm using this information to guide me in picking out my colors. Now I'm using this deluxe paper by Cricut. This was made and it's already sized for the Cricut Joy. It's going to go on the Cricut Joy mat. You can use any cardstock you want. When I made the other card, I just used plain old cardstock. This card was made from cardstock from my stash. There's nothing fancy about this. This was all cut out with the Cricut Joy. So you can use regular cardstock, use what you have. I have this deluxe paper. I have the Cricut Joy mat, so I'm going to use these. So we've got our file all set up in Cricut Design Space. So all we need to do is refer to Cricut Design Space and see which color it's going to cut first. So I'm kind of using her ideas of this is going to be a light color, this is going to be a dark color, this is going to be a dark, or I'm sorry, this is going to be a dark color for these pieces. The light blue I'm going to refer to a lighter color, dark color, light color. I just like her contrast, but I'm not going to necessarily be using these colors. If you want to change those in Cricut Design Space, you can. So let's open up this paper and see what we have to work with. So I kind of like working with this because everything already coordinates, but I absolutely love the scrappy version of Jess's project. So here are the colors that are included in this particular paper pack. So I think maybe I'm gonna, when it goes to the B pieces, I'm going to use this one. This is a lighter piece, so I'll use that for the E pieces. For the dark pieces, maybe go with this green. And I don't know, let's just play with it and see how it turns out. There is no right or wrong. She definitely encourages you to be very scrappy about it. I actually prefer to use patterned papers, but we do have some solids in here. So let's just see how this turns out. So the first one it's calling for is the light blue color, which is the E pieces. So I think maybe I'm just going to use this one. So I'm going to put my other papers aside. I'm going to remove my mat, or the cover off my mat. I'm going to place the cardstock right inside. All right, so we're going to load this into the machine. You just want to put it in nice and even. And the Joy will go ahead and check it, make sure your mat's lined up straight. I have the blade installed. And all that's left to do is click go. You have to click it on the screen. There's no buttons on the Cricut Joy. And it's going to cut our pieces out. All right, once it's done, we just hit unload on the screen. And you can check this out. The pieces are cut. They're still attached to the backing, which is, it's cut out like a sticker. So here's my cutout piece. And I'm going to leave the others in place just so we don't lose track. So I'm going to put that aside. The next color that it's cutting is showing the green. So for that, let's do, I think for that, I'm going to actually use the green cardstock. Again, my pieces are cut out. Just set that aside. The next color it's going to cut is the B pieces, and I want to use this. Those are some larger pieces, and I want to get some patterns in there. Just fast forward, I just continued to cut each piece as the Cricut Design Space called for it, and I kind of just chose the patterns along the way. Okay, so the next step is we're just going to take a piece of plain cardstock. Now, it could really be any kind of cardstock. You just need something to put everything together on. This is just a piece of white cardstock, nothing fancy about it. And mine is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches wide. This is way bigger than I need, but I just want to make sure that I have enough room to get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at the black, and I want to start in one corner. So I'm going to start with the A piece on the pattern, and I'm going to grab one of my A pieces, which was this one, and I'm going to start right in the corner, lining that up. Now I'm not pushing that down really well because we may have to move this around a little bit, and it does give you a little bit of wiggle room. So we started with A, the next piece is the B. So I need to remember which one that was, which I believe was this one. And I'm going to grab one of those pieces, and I'm going to line that up. Now she's got rounded corners on these, so you want to make sure that you line it up so that everything stays straight on both sides. You might have to straighten it up a little bit. And again, I'm just lightly tacking this down. This side is still open, just in case I need to move it a little. The next piece is the E piece. And for me, that was this one. So you might want to write down on the back of your paper which piece is which letter, just to keep track. So again, that one's not real straight. Let's reposition it. Of course, I'm trying to do this on camera, so I'm not at my normal angle. Okay, so that's just lightly tacked down. All right, the next thing we need to build this quadrant is our C piece, which is going to be one of these. And kind of hard to see the difference between the red and the C and the D colors. So, but if you look really close, you can see it, especially if you look on the screen. So this piece goes right here. All right. And then we need the D piece. Which is this piece. So that's going to go right here, and I'm slightly overlapping it. The objective is to line up the bottoms. So I'm lining up that straight edge bottom with that straight edge. All right, so we have built that quadrant. So now what I want to do is start on this side. So I'm going to put the E piece, which again is this one. That's going to go right here. There's our E, and then our B piece. And then you're going to just continue to build your quilt block using the reference sheet on the PDF and your corresponding cardstock. Okay, so I have built my block just like she has. Super cute. So now you could be done if you wanted, but what I'm going to do is take this over to my sewing machine, and I'm actually going to zigzag stitch right between all of my seams. And that's going to give it a really quilted look. So here we are at my sewing machine, and you can see I'm just sewing like I would sew fabric. I don't do anything special to sew on paper. That's actually the first way I ever learned to sew. Is I have been sewing on paper for a very long time. I was a paper crafter before I dabbled in fabrics, but sewing on paper is I've never found it to cause any problems with my machine. I'm using a standard universal needle. I believe this is an 80-12 needle. You don't want to reuse this needle for sewing fabric after you sew paper. I don't have to adjust the tension on my machine. Mine's self-adjusting. You might have to find that you need to make a little bit more of an adjustment. You do want to keep your stitch length at a longer size because you're actually perforating the paper. This isn't like fabric. It's not going to just separate the fibers. You're actually making holes. So if you have your stitch length too close together, you are going to make a hole. And I don't worry about trimming all of those threads nice and tidy or pulling them through the back. If that bothers you, you can. I actually love the way the little threads look. Obviously, I'll trim them better than this, but I like the people to understand that this was actually sewn. It's not just a look of sewing. This was actually sewn cardstock. So I don't worry about trimming everything nice and neat. So don't be afraid to try sewing on paper, but isn't this cool? Look at that finished texture. Okay, so I have sewn all of my seams with a zigzag stitch. Not sure how well you can see that, but I absolutely love how this turned out. So the next thing I'm going to do is take my paper trimmer. If you don't have a paper trimmer, just use scissors. That's just perfectly fine. And I'm just going to square up my block, just like you would a quilt block. Let's go this way. All right, so here is my finished quilt block. Oops, looks like I need to trim up that edge a little bit. So here we go. So my finished block ended up being 1, 2, 3, 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4 and a half-ish. So here is how I determine how to make my card base. So I'm going to take just a piece of paper, and I know that this is 4 inches wide. So I'm going to take my paper trimmer again. And if you don't know this, if you have the Cricut paper trimmer, you can pull this out. And I'm going to line my paper up with the 4-inch right there. There we go. All right, out of side. So now we're going to just fold this in half. And you can do the math and cut this ahead of time if you want. But I'm just going to fold this in half. And now we're going to place this right on the top folded edge. And I'm just going to use a tape runner. You can use liquid glue, whatever you have. This is a tape runner I have from my paper crafting days. Have some more threads here I need to trim. And I'm just going to line this up on the top edge on that 4-inch side. There we go. And then I'm just going to use my paper trimmer again and trim off the excess. So there you have your finished card. Now you can add to it like I did in this one. I added a little sticker, I added some buttons, a little heart sticker, or you could just leave it like this. But how cute would this be to send to someone who quilts or someone who sews, or just for a general note card? So I hope you're enjoying our block party. Jess and I have had a lot of fun working on these projects, and I hope to have several more alternative projects coming up. Jess is going to have tons of beautiful scrappy blocks for you to create a full quilt if that is what you're looking for. So we have a Cricut Facebook group. It's called Sewing Patterns and Tutorials with Lorrie Nunemaker, and I will have that linked in the description below. I would love it if you share your projects there. If you're using the Cricut or the Cricut Joy, please join my other Cricut Facebook groups and share your projects there. And I also have the Craft Crazy Facebook group where we welcome all kinds of crafts. So check out our links, check out our videos, make sure you subscribe to Jess, make sure you're subscribed to my channel so that you don't miss any more of our upcoming block party. See you guys, bye-bye.